the kitchen fell silent, and I could hear my heart pounding like a drum. Before I could take another step, my mother-in-law angrily grabbed the steaming pot from the stove. In one swift motion, she hurled the scalding contents toward me. The searing pain burned into my skin, and I stumbled backward, clutching my pregnant belly and gasping for breath. But what happened next was beyond anything I could have imagined, something that would change my life forever. Hello, my name is Vanessa, and I'm 34 years old. For the past 7 years, I've been working as a luxury home decorator in the upscale neighborhood of Westlake, known for its grand homes and wealthy residents. Designing interiors for multi-million-dollar mansions has been my passion, and my career has flourished because of it. My days were filled with glamorous projects and social events, but despite my professional success, I longed for something more, something personal. 3 years ago, I met Ryan, a 36-year-old financial strategist working at a prominent firm. He was charming, kind, and driven, everything I had ever wanted in a partner. We married after a whirlwind romance and moved into a Victorian mansion with sweeping staircases, hardwood floors, and antique charm. It was the perfect home to start our new life together. For the first year, everything was perfect. Ryan and I often stayed up late discussing plans for the future, dreaming of the family we hoped to build. But dreams can shatter quickly, and I didn't know that the home I had poured my heart into would soon become a prison of fear and manipulation. It was a cold February evening, and the winter wind howled through the empty streets of Westlake. I had just finished setting the table for dinner when the phone rang. Ryan's voice on the other end was tense and filled with worry. "Vanessa, my mom had a mild stroke," he said. For the first time, I heard him sound genuinely shaken. "We need to bring her home so I can take care of her. She raised me alone after Dad died. I owe her everything." I agreed without hesitation. Of course, we had to take care of her. A few days later, Ryan's mother, Eleanor, arrived at our doorstep. She was nothing like I had expected. I had heard stories of her strength and independence, her involvement in charitable events, and how she was highly respected in her community. When I met her, she was impeccably dressed, her gray hair perfectly styled, and she carried herself with the grace of someone used to admiration. But beneath that polished exterior was a woman with an iron will and a need for control. At first, her presence seemed harmless. She offered suggestions on how to improve the house, ways to arrange the furniture, and tips on making the meals more traditional. But within a week, the suggestions turned into rules. "Dinner must always be served at exactly 6 p.m., Vanessa," she said one evening as she watched me from the kitchen doorway. "In this family, we eat together on time. Being late brings bad luck." She had rules for everything: the order in which dishes were placed on the table, how the floors should be cleaned, and even how the laundry was to be folded. I thought they were small things at first, but as the days passed, they became chains that tightened around my life. Ryan didn't notice the growing tension. He was busy with work and often traveled for weeks at a time, and whenever he spoke to Eleanor during his business trips, she painted a perfect picture of our life at home. "Vanessa is still learning, but I'm guiding her," she would tell him in her calm, maternal voice. "You don't need to worry about anything." To Ryan, she was still the mother who had raised him single-handedly after his father's death, the woman who had made countless sacrifices to ensure his success. But to me, she was a suffocating presence, her demands escalating by the day. "She's the most amazing woman," Ryan often said, and each time, my heart ached a little more. I didn't know how to tell him that the woman he admired was slowly tearing me apart. Eleanor's influence over the house grew stronger. My days became centered around following her orders, cleaning, cooking, and making sure every detail of the house met her standards. I felt like an outsider in my own home, a home that I had once cherished as the beginning of our dream life. But this was only the beginning of the nightmare; the worst was yet to come. I found out I was pregnant on a bright spring morning in March. The trees lining the streets of Westlake had begun shedding the last remnants of winter, and the warm sunlight filtered through our bedroom window. As I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, clutching the positive pregnancy test, my hands trembled, and tears of relief streamed down my face. After 3 years of trying and countless doctor visits, it was finally happening. When I shared the news with Ryan that evening, he pulled me into a tight embrace. His eyes glistened with tears, and he kissed my forehead. "We're going to be parents, Vanessa. This is the happiest day of my life." His words filled me with hope, and for the first time in months, I allowed myself to believe that everything would be okay. But that hope was short-lived. I approached Eleanor later that evening, expecting at least a smile of approval. "I have wonderful news," I said, holding up the test. "I'm pregnant." She stared at me for a moment, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then she set her teacup down gently on the table and sighed. "Don't use pregnancy as an excuse to slack off," she said. When I was expecting Ryan, I managed the household perfectly. I hand-washed clothes, cooked 3 meals a day, and still had time for volunteer work. Pregnancy is not a reason to be lazy. Her words hit me like a slap. I stood frozen, the pregnancy test still in my hand, as she continued her lecture about how things were different in her day. From that moment, her demands grew more intense. She expected me to be up at 5 a.m. every morning to clean the entire house, from top to bottom. The floors had to be scrubbed, the windows polished, and the garden maintained. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner had to be homemade with no shortcuts or store-bought items. Whenever I showed signs of fatigue or morning sickness, she would scowl and shake her head. "Weakness is a choice," she would say dismissively. I knew women who worked full-time jobs and raised families without complaining. At first, I tried to keep up with her expectations, but by my 5th month of pregnancy, the stress and physical strain began to take a toll on my body. I experienced sharp abdominal pain and occasional spotting, which left me terrified. My obstetrician warned me to rest and avoid any heavy lifting or strenuous activity. But Eleanor didn't care about the doctor's advice. One afternoon, after I had spent hours scrubbing the kitchen floor, I collapsed onto the couch, my body aching. Eleanor walked into the room, her expression cold and disapproving. "Resting again?" she sneered. In my day, women didn't need doctors telling them to lie down every time they felt a little discomfort. "You should be stronger than this." I tried to explain that the doctor had ordered bed rest, but she waved me off. "Doctors exaggerate." I knew a woman who ran a marathon when she was 9 months pregnant. "It's all about mindset, Vanessa. You're just not managing your health properly." What disturbed me most wasn't her dismissive attitude, but the way she looked at my growing belly. There was something unsettling about the way her eyes narrowed whenever she glanced at it, as if she wasn't happy about the life growing inside me. I couldn't shake the feeling that she resented the baby, but I didn't understand why. Then one afternoon, while organizing the attic, I found an old photograph. It showed a young pregnant woman standing in front of the same house. The back of the photo read, "Irene, 6 months pregnant, 2009. I had never heard Ryan mention anyone named Irene, and when I showed the photo to Eleanor, her reaction was immediate and hostile. "That's none of your business," she snapped, snatching the photo from my hands. "Forget you ever saw it." Confused and unsettled, I tried to push the incident out of my mind, but the feeling of dread lingered. My body was under constant stress, my mind raced with questions, and I was slowly losing the strength to fight back. The day everything came crashing down was colder than usual, with gray clouds casting a gloomy shadow over Westlake. Ryan had left for a 2-week business trip to Europe, leaving me alone with Eleanor. That morning, I felt uneasy. The dull ache in my abdomen had grown sharper, and when I went to the bathroom, I noticed spotting. My heart pounded in fear. I had been experiencing mild symptoms over the past few weeks, but this felt different. By 2 p.m., the phone rang, and my hands trembled as I picked it up. It was my obstetrician. "Vanessa, you need to come to the hospital immediately," she said. "Your test results indicate complications that could be dangerous for the baby. We may need immediate intervention." I hung up the phone, my fingers cold as ice. My instincts screamed at me to leave the house and get to the hospital as quickly as possible. But when I entered the kitchen, Eleanor was standing by the stove, chopping vegetables with mechanical precision. The warm aroma of beef stew filled the air, but it only made my nausea worse. "Eleanor, I need to go to the hospital," I said, my voice shaking. "The baby could be in danger." She didn't even look up from the cutting board. "We're hosting the Martins for dinner tonight," she replied calmly. "You can't leave now." "Please," I begged, gripping the edge of the kitchen counter for support. "The doctor said it's serious." Eleanor stopped chopping and slowly turned to face me, her eyes cold and unforgiving. "Doctors are always overreacting," she said dismissively. "In my day, we didn't run to the hospital every time we felt a little discomfort. You'll stay and finish preparing dinner. That's what a good wife does." I felt my knees weaken, but I knew I couldn't let her control me this time. "I'm leaving," I said firmly, taking a step toward the door. Suddenly, she slammed the knife onto the countertop. The loud clatter made me jump. Her face twisted into something I had never seen before: rage, madness, and something even darker. "You're not going anywhere," she hissed. "Family dinner comes first." My heart raced as I turned to leave, but before I could reach the door, I heard her shout, "You ungrateful, useless daughter-in-law." Then it happened. In the corner of my eye, I saw her grab the large pot of boiling stew from the stove. The steam rose in thick clouds, and before I could react, she hurled the pot at me with terrifying force. The boiling liquid hit my face and chest, and I let out a scream as the scalding heat burned my skin. Pain shot through me like fire, and I stumbled backward, clutching my abdomen. The next moment, I felt her hands shove me, and I fell hard onto the cold kitchen floor. The impact sent a jolt of agony through my body, and I felt a sharp stabbing pain in my lower abdomen. My vision blurred, and tears streamed down my face as I struggled to breathe. Eleanor's voice echoed in the distance, distorted and far away. "You're not fit to carry my son's child," she spat. "A woman like you will only ruin him." I tried to crawl toward the door, but my body refused to move. My mind was spinning, and the burning sensation on my face made it hard to focus. Just as I felt myself slipping into unconsciousness, I heard a voice calling my name. "Vanessa, are you okay?" It was Hammy, our neighbor. She stood in the doorway, her phone in her hand, her face pale with shock. "Oh my God, what happened?" Before I could answer, the sound of distant sirens filled the air. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off the kitchen walls, and the last thing I saw before everything went black was Eleanor's face, twisted with a mix of anger and triumph. When I regained consciousness, the world around me felt hazy and distant, as though I were trapped between reality and a dream. My eyelids fluttered open, and I squinted against the bright overhead lights of the hospital room. The steady beeping of a heart monitor filled the room, and the smell of antiseptic stung my nose. Every breath I took felt heavy, and pain radiated from my face and chest, a dull burning sensation that reminded me of what had happened. Panic surged through me as I instinctively placed my hand on my abdomen. The baby. My heart pounded as I struggled to sit up, but my body felt too weak to move. A nurse quickly came to my side, her voice calm and reassuring. "Vanessa, please lie back. You're safe now." "The baby?" I croaked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Is my baby okay?" The nurse smiled gently. "The baby's heartbeat is stable, but you need to rest. The next 72 hours are critical to ensure there are no complications." Relief washed over me, and tears streamed down my face as I whispered a silent prayer of gratitude. But that relief was short-lived. As I wiped my tears away, my gaze fell on the television mounted on the wall. The headline flashing across the screen made my blood run cold. "Breaking news: Eleanor Whitmore arrested in domestic violence case." The screen showed footage of Eleanor being led away in handcuffs by the police. Her once pristine gray hair was now disheveled, and her designer coat was wrinkled. But what sent a chill down my spine was the look on her face. There was no remorse, only a twisted sense of satisfaction. The news anchor's voice filled the room. Authorities have confirmed that Eleanor Whitmore is being investigated not only for the recent domestic violence incident involving her daughter-in-law, Vanessa Whitmore, but also for possible involvement in the disappearance of Irene Scott, who went missing 15 years ago. I stared at the screen, green in disbelief, the words sinking in slowly. Irene Scott, the name from the photograph I had found in the attic, the pregnant woman whose picture had been tucked away and hidden. The door to my hospital room burst open, and Ryan rushed in, his face pale and his hair disheveled. He looked nothing like the composed man I had married. His eyes were red, as though he had been crying during the entire flight back. He dropped his bag to the floor and ran to my side, gently cupping my face. "Vanessa," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't see it. I should have been here." Tears streamed down his face as he leaned over and kissed my forehead. "Are you okay? Is the baby okay?" I nodded weakly, still processing everything. "We're okay, but Ryan." "I know," he interrupted, his voice shaking. He pulled out the photograph of Irene that I had shown him before, the one I had found in the attic. "The police found this in my mother's basement, along with Irene's passport, phone, and her diary." He choked on the words, unable to finish the sentence. "She never left voluntarily. Vanessa, my mother lied to everyone." Tammy, our neighbor, entered the room quietly and stood by Ryan's side. "I've been documenting Eleanor's behavior for the past 6 months," she said softly. "I always suspected something was wrong. When I heard what happened to you, I couldn't stay silent. I've handed everything over to the police, videos, recordings, and testimonies." Ryan sat down, his face buried in his hands. "Why didn't I see this sooner? Irene tried to warn me, and I believed my mother. I thought she was grieving, but he stopped, unable to finish the thought. I reached out and placed my hand over his, squeezing gently. "You couldn't have known," I whispered. "But now we can stop her. We can make sure she never hurts anyone again." Tammy nodded. "The police have enough evidence now to convict her, not just for what she did to you, but for what she did to Irene. She can't hide behind her public image anymore." A mix of emotions swirled inside me: relief, anger, grief, and determination. Eleanor had taken so much from us, but she wouldn't win. I wouldn't let her. 3 months later, I stood in the courtroom, my hand resting protectively on my swollen belly. I was now 8 months pregnant, and the baby's gentle kicks reminded me why I was here: to fight for justice. The courtroom was filled with reporters, curious onlookers, and a few familiar faces from Westlake. The air was heavy with tension as everyone waited for the verdict. Ryan sat beside me, his hand tightly gripping mine. His jaw was clenched, and I could feel the nervous energy radiating off him. Tammy sat on my other side, offering silent support. None of us spoke as the judge entered the courtroom, his stern gaze scanning the room. "All rise," the bailiff announced, and we stood until the judge took his seat. The proceedings felt like a blur, evidence presented, testimonies replayed, and Eleanor's composed face betraying nothing as the prosecution described her years of manipulation and abuse. The details were chilling: how she had controlled every aspect of Ryan's life, how she had driven Irene to desperation, and how she had nearly cost me and my baby our lives. The final blow came when the prosecution presented Tammy's 6 months of recordings, audio and video evidence showing Eleanor berating, belittling, and physically threatening me. The courtroom fell silent as the videos played, Eleanor's voice echoing through the speakers: "A woman like her doesn't deserve to carry my son's child." I flinched as I heard those words again, the memory of that fateful day flashing in my mind. Tammy placed her hand on mine, grounding me, as the judge asked if the jury had reached a verdict. "Yes, Your Honor," the jury foreperson said, standing up. The judge nodded and turned to address the court. On the charges of aggravated assault, intentional harm to a fetus, and evidence tampering related to the Irene Scott disappearance case, the jury finds the defendant, Eleanor Whitmore, guilty on all counts. The words echoed in my mind, each one a step closer to justice. Eleanor's face twitched slightly, her lips pressing together in a thin line, but she quickly masked her emotions and sat as gracefully as ever, as though the verdict didn't affect her. The judge's voice was firm as he continued. The defendant is hereby sentenced to 15 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 10 years. Murmurs filled the courtroom, and I felt Ryan squeeze my hand. His grip trembled, a single tear rolling down his cheek, but he didn't wipe it away. I turned to Tammy, who gave me a reassuring nod. It was over, at least this part of it. Eleanor stood as the bailiff approached her, her hands cuffed behind her back. For the first time, she spoke directly to the courtroom. Her voice was calm, but her words sent a chill down my spine. I did what a good mother would do. Everything I did was for my son. The silence in the room was deafening as the weight of her words sank in. She showed no remorse, no apology, only a twisted sense of accomplishment, as though she believed she had been right all along. As she was escorted out of the courtroom, Ryan lowered his head and whispered, "Why did it have to be this way? Why didn't I see what she was doing?" I placed my hand gently on his shoulder. "It's not your fault, Ryan. She fooled everyone, but now we can move on." The press conference that followed was brief but powerful. Ryan addressed the crowd, his voice steady despite the emotional turmoil. Domestic violence isn't just a private issue, it's a problem that affects families and communities. We have to do better, and we have to listen when someone says they need help. As we left the courthouse, the warm rays of the early summer sun bathed the steps. The battle was over, but I knew the journey wasn't finished. There was still healing to do, memories to process, and a life to rebuild. But for the first time in months, I felt a sense of closure. A month after the trial, Ryan and I packed our belongings and moved to a new home in the peaceful town of Ashwood. It wasn't a grand mansion like the one we had left behind, but it was exactly what we needed: quiet, cozy, and surrounded by trees that swayed gently in the breeze. The neighborhood had an air of serenity, with children riding bikes along the tree-lined streets and neighbors waving warmly as they passed by. The new house was a modest 2-story home with large windows that filled the rooms with natural light. I loved the simplicity of it. It didn't carry the weight of old memories or Eleanor's controlling presence. Here, we could start fresh. Tammy came over to help us unpack, just as she had promised. As we sorted through boxes of dishes, clothes, and keepsakes, she suddenly called out from the living room. "Vanessa, look what I found." I turned to see her holding the photograph of Irene, the same photo I had discovered in the attic months ago. My chest tightened as I took it from her hands. The woman in the photo looked so happy, unaware of the tragedy that awaited her. For a moment, I felt a deep sadness for her, for the life she had lost and the future she never got to experience. Ryan walked over and stood beside me, his gaze fixed on the photo. "Irene should never be forgotten," I said softly. "We owe it to her to keep her memory alive." He nodded, his eyes glassy with unshed tears. "Let's frame it and put it in the living room. She's a part of our story now, and she always will be." I placed the photo on the mantel above the fireplace, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. Irene's story had finally been heard, and justice had been served, but her memory would live on, not as a tragic reminder, but as a symbol of strength and resilience. That evening, we held a small barbecue in the backyard to celebrate the beginning of our new life. Tammy, our friends, and the members of the legal team who had helped us with the case joined us. The smell of grilled burgers and roasted corn filled the air as laughter and conversation flowed freely. For the first time in a long while, I felt truly happy. Ryan stood by the grill, flipping burgers with a relaxed smile that I hadn't seen in months. He looked over at me and placed his hand gently on my belly. "He's been kicking a lot today," he said, a warm glow in his eyes. I smiled. "He's eager to meet his dad." Tammy chuckled from across the yard. "He's going to be a strong little boy, just like his mom." The warmth of her words settled over me like a comforting blanket. We had come through the worst, and now there was hope, hope for the future, for our son, and for a life free from fear and control. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned a soft shade of pink, I looked up and saw a shooting star streak across the sky. It felt like a sign, a reminder that even after the darkest night, there is light waiting to shine through. On the morning of September 3rd, a few weeks earlier than expected, I woke up to a sharp pain that made me catch my breath. At first, I thought it was another one of the Braxton Hicks contractions that I had been experiencing on and off for the past week, but this pain was different, stronger and more persistent. I sat up in bed, clutching my belly as another wave of pain rolled through me. "Ryan," I whispered, nudging him awake. "I think it's time." His eyes shot open, and he quickly jumped out of bed, grabbing the hospital bag we had packed weeks ago. "Are you sure? Is it happening now?" I nodded through gritted teeth as the contractions grew stronger. "Yes, we need to go." The ride to the hospital felt like an eternity. Ryan held my hand the entire way, whispering words of encouragement as I focused on breathing through the pain. By the time we arrived, the contractions were only a few minutes apart, and the nurses rushed me into the delivery room. The sterile smell of the hospital and the bright overhead lights felt overwhelming, but I kept my focus on one thought: our son was almost here. The hours blurred together in a haze of pain, effort, and determination. Ryan stayed by my side the entire time, his presence grounding me as I fought through the overwhelming waves of labor. Just when I thought I had no strength left, the doctor's voice broke through the fog. "One more push, Vanessa. You're almost there." I summoned every ounce of strength I had left and pushed, tears streaming down my face as I felt the pressure ease and heard the sound that made my heart stop, the cry of a newborn baby. "It's a boy," the doctor announced, placing him on my chest. "A healthy baby boy." I stared down at him, overwhelmed by a flood of emotions. His tiny fingers curled around mine, and his cries softened as I held him close. His skin was warm against me, and in that moment, I knew that every struggle, every pain, and every tear had been worth it. Ryan leaned over, kissing my forehead, then gently touching the baby's cheek. "Welcome to the world, Noah," he whispered. "You're finally here." Tears filled my eyes as I whispered the name again. Noah Whitmore. It was a name that symbolized new beginnings, hope, and the future we had fought so hard to protect. Later that morning, as sunlight streamed through the hospital room window, I watched Noah sleep peacefully in my arms. His tiny chest rose and fell with each breath, and his lips formed the smallest smile. Ryan sat beside me, his hand resting on my shoulder. "He's perfect," Ryan said softly. "You're perfect." I smiled, brushing my fingers gently across Noah's hair. "We're a family now, and this time, nothing will break us." Tammy arrived a few hours later, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers, daisies, lavender, and a single white lily, Irene's favorite flower. "I thought it would be fitting," she said, placing the vase on the windowsill. I nodded, my heart swelling with gratitude. She'll always be a part of our story. As the afternoon light filled the room, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. The fear, the pain, and the control that had once overshadowed my life were gone. In their place was love, resilience, and the strength of a new beginning. I looked down at Noah, who stirred slightly in my arms before settling again. "You're going to grow up strong and happy, my little fighter," I whispered. "And I'll make sure you know what love and safety feel like every day of your life." Ryan leaned in, kissing both me and Noah. "No more looking back," he said softly. "We have everything we need right here." As I gazed out the window, the gentle rustling of the wind through the trees seemed to echo the promise of a better future. Our journey had been painful, but we had come out stronger. And as I held Noah close, I knew that this was just the beginning of a beautiful new chapter in our lives. Thank you for joining me on this emotional journey. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments section below. I'd love to hear from you, and for more captivating stories like this, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. See you in the next story.